Thank you, Tim. I have a lot of mutual respect for my brother. I do think if you're going to drink the water, you should sing the entire song at least, but after all these years, I still have to share with my younger siblings, which is okay. I'm just going to quickly open in prayer again before we get started, and then we'll get into it. God and Father, thank you that you are our God and Father, that we can come to you and that we can come to you in prayer. Thank you that you have promised to be with us, and I pray for this evening. I pray for your Spirit in this room. I pray that you would be honored and lifted up in everything that is said, and if there's anything that is not honoring to you, I pray that you would keep it from being said. I just pray for your presence and for your working through this evening. Amen. Okay, so just to give a very little bit of background to me being up here, I think it's been, I don't know, at least 10 years. It's been a long time. I don't even know if it was here or the other room. But I did probably gain just a little bit of respect for the amount of faith that our leadership has through this experience, because as some of you know, Leanne did the bulletin while Bob and Heather were in Zambia, so she got access to the quarterly schedules, which meant I had access to the quarterly schedules. So a little over 3 months ago, I was looking through the quarterly schedule and I saw my name to speak. I don't think I would have had enough faith to put my name on the quarterly schedule before I said yes, but anyway, here I am. It worked out. They did ask shortly afterwards, and yeah, that was all good. So, topic was also left up to me. I had a verse that was kind of going through my mind at the time, and that's what I took my topic from that verse. I'm just going to start with a question. You guys can answer this all for yourself, and I'm going to refer. Can you hear me when I move over to the side here, or should I move yeah? That's all working, that's good. So I'm going to ask that question. You can answer that all for yourselves. You don't have to I don't need a show of hands or anything like that. But just list a few of the things, or 5 of the things is what I have written down, 5 of the most valuable things you might possess. I would be curious to know what all your answers are, but for sake of time, we won't actually take the poll. You might have said something like your walk with the Lord. That would have been a very good answer. There's many different things that could have gone into this list. Your walk with the Lord. You might have said your home, your house, your property. You might have said your car. We're all in different stages of life, so we're going to put different things on this list. Your spouse, or your marriage, or your family. You might have said your time. Sorry, not very used to this PowerPoint thing either. You might have said your time. These are all very valuable things, and they're all valid things you could have put on your list. And that, just thinking through whatever you answered that question with, I'm going to follow it up with another question. What do you do to maintain the most valuable things in your life? If you look at that list, your walk with the Lord, I hope there's effort that goes into maintaining your walk with the Lord. If you look at your home, your car, it takes maintenance. If you don't maintain them, your neighbors will know. It takes a toll. Your spouse, your marriage, your family, that takes work, it takes maintenance. We all know that, for those of us who are married, for those of us who have kids, for those of us who just have siblings and parents, you know that it takes work to maintain relationships in general. Your time, you have to be intentional with how you spend your time. No matter what you put in this list, I think you can find ways that you have to put work in to maintain them. One thing on this list I did not include on mine, and I'm curious if anybody did. I doubt anybody included it on theirs, but this is kind of where I want to go tonight, is your mind. I wonder how many people put your mind on that list. I see one hand go up. That's one more than I was expecting. But I'm going to ask the same question now. Your mind, obviously, I would say, some of you might make it easy to believe otherwise, but I would say is a very valuable thing. And it takes maintenance too. What do you do to maintain your mind? Just a couple quick statistics before I go any further. And I had a bit of a hard time finding statistics. I won't call the topic of my message tonight mental health, because it's not really about mental health as we think of it. But I did, just for sake of it is relatable, and for context, I did try to look up a few statistics. I had a hard time finding good current statistics. You can do your own research if you want to, but I'm just going to share one or two that I found. This one was quite current. I wrote the date down wrong. Now that I look up there, it should say 2023. This is from March 2023. 33% of working Canadians have a high mental health risk. 43 have a moderate mental health risk, and 23 have a low mental health risk. You get different numbers depending on what you find online, and I don't exactly know what to trust, but the numbers are all up there, so I'm just going to throw that up there just kind of as a reference. This one I found interesting. The annual economic cost of mental illness in Canada is estimated at over $50 billion per year. This includes healthcare costs, lost productivity, and reductions in health-related quality of life. The interesting thing about that one right there, if you can read it, is that's from 2011. I can only imagine after the last few years we've had what that number would be now. Mental health is something we hear more and more about. Obviously, it's very prevalent and talked about. It's a very complicated issue, one that I'm not at all qualified to address, but it is a very current issue for many people. And I think as Christians, I want to just focus on Christians, some couple practical things on how we maintain our mind, our thoughts, and our mind. A few verses about the mind to start. I put any verse, if you want to look them up, that's fine. Any verse that I'm going to include, I put on my PowerPoint here to save you from looking them up if you don't want to. This is from Colossians 3, verse 2. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. This verse went through my mind quite a bit over the years through COVID. Obviously, there was a lot of different mindsets, a lot of different opinions on different things, a lot of mental health struggles and issues. And I often had to go back. This verse just kind of became a theme for a little bit for myself. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. I'm just going to read a few other verses. We all know this one. It's a very common, popular verse. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first commandment. I think we all can relate to loving with all of our heart, with all of our soul. To love with all your mind, it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but that's included in that list, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what that means. And with all your strength. A few other verses. 1 Peter 1, verse 13 says, therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. Romans 8, verse 6, for the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the spirit is life and peace. Philippians 4, verse 7, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. That verse you kind of have to take in context. I didn't want to put that whole first section of the chapter, but I included the next one because it's very relevant. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Those are just a few verses. You can go home, you can Google verses on your mind or however you want to word that. There's a lot of verses in there, and I will refer to some other ones as we progress through this evening. But I did want to just think a little bit, if we look at mental health as Christians, where our minds should be at. What are some contributors? Like I said before, I'm the last person that should talk about mental health, and I'm going to avoid most of what we refer to as mental health. And I don't even want to try to attempt talking about it, but I do think that there's a few things that apply to any one of us as Christians, and I think it's good to think about sometimes. Just a couple main contributors. If we look at our mind, or having a healthy mind as a Christian, I think we can take some comparisons or look to the rest of our body, just health in general, and we can ask ourselves the questions, are there similarities between the mind and the rest of our body, just of what we know of health? And I think there are. If we just look at our human body and we look at our general health, what are some things that are very important? Tim? Health.
Drink lots of water.
Lots of water. Eat. Okay, let's put those together and call it diet. Diet, what goes into the body? Exercise. Those are the only two I had, but Dan? Sleep, yes. Fun fact, your mind actually is very active and consumes a lot of energy while you sleep, but that's an aside. I would agree with that. Sleep is very important too. The first two the first two mentioned, the two that I had included here, diet, what goes into your body, and exercise, I would say are probably two of the biggest things when it comes to just our general, and I would 100% agree with sleep too. Rest, very important things when it comes to our general health. Could we say the same for our mind? I think we can take some comparisons. I'm no great example when it comes to the best diet or exercise. You can ask my wife. I could do better. But I think it's not hard to see. If you look at, I know people that are very diligent that way, and it makes a great difference in their general health. I think it's the same with our mind, and I think it's even more important with our mind. If we look, number one, at exercise, sorry. I see two screens. I've never used this before, so I see both screens, the next slide and the slide that's up there, but I'm still figuring out which one's which, so my apologies on that. Let's just look at those two, diet and exercise. So diet, what we feed ourselves is very important for just our natural health, for the health of our body. I'd say it's also very important for our mind. And I'm going to bring my little daughter into this as an analogy. That's Raylan. I think you all know her. If you haven't met her yet, you should get to know her. She's an absolute gem. But I think there's a lesson we can learn from Raylan. And she doesn't have a whole lot in front of her right there on her plate. But one thing that she is starting to develop very quickly is a sense of, well, she's had a sense of taste for a while, but as her sense of taste progresses, I guess you could say, so does her likes and her dislikes. And I'm using her as an example because if left just up to Raylan, she would eat strawberries and bread. She likes cheese. We don't let her eat ice cream normally, but she would eat ice cream all day long and yogurt, and that would be about it. There'd be a lot of things that she wouldn't eat. Vegetables, not so much. I have a very wise wife who includes vegetables in her meal and makes her eat everything. As human beings, we kind of do the same thing in many ways. We can do that with food. We all have our likes and our dislikes. I think we can do that mentally too. We all have things that we feed our minds that we enjoy. Some things we don't enjoy, they take work. And left to ourselves, it's very easy to just feed ourselves mentally with the same thing over and over and over again and miss out on a lot of what we could be taking in, things that would be very healthy for our mind. An unbalanced diet is not healthy. I think it's very easy in our current day and age to have a very unbalanced mental diet, if I can use that term. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about the news or Google or anything like that, but you've probably all caught on to the fact that when you search something, it shows up in your advertising. It shows up on your Google feed or YouTube feed or whatever it is again. Whatever you search is what gets fed to you the next time. That's what you click on again for a lot of us, and you end up going down basically a self-made trail, which is very one-sided. It's very unbalanced. It's very unhealthy, I think, a lot of times. Romans 12 verse 2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, his pleasing, his perfect will." This world feeds us all kinds of stuff. A lot of it's garbage. And it's very easy to just kind of go down that road, and most of our mental energy is basically wasted, or in some cases I think, and I'm speaking for myself here too, a lot of times I think it's actually detrimental to my mind and the way my mind should be functioning on a spiritual level. That's diet. What about exercise? How do we exercise our brain? Our brain's not a muscle. Most of us are familiar with what it takes to exercise a muscle. We work it, it hurts, you actually tear the muscle, it comes back stronger. The more you exercise, the stronger your muscles get, the bigger they get. Your brain is a little bit different than that. But I think we can put exercise, we can make the comparison just like we can with diet. I think we can exercise our minds as well. And I think that's very important for our mental health as Christians. So it's not a muscle. What is our brain? I'm the last person that should be speaking on what our brain is. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse. There are nurses here that probably know way more about the medical world than I'll ever know. But I do a little bit of research. Your brain is a lot of water, it's a lot of fat. If there's anyone in the audience that prides themselves in not having an ounce of fat, the joke's on you, because you should. It's a lot of water, it's a lot of fat, and we have neurons in our brain, which are basically cells that transmit electrical impulses, or they send signals, they connect with each other. We have 86 billion neurons in our brain, apparently. I don't know who counted them, but that's what I found out. What are neurons? This is a kind of blurry picture right here, but that is, if you Google it, you'll get different colors, different angles, but they all look basically the same as that. There's slightly different variations of them. It's a cell like that, and it has a whole bunch of different, I don't know what you call those, arms, reaching out both sides of it. And 86 billion of those in their brain. We have many more through the rest of our body. That's what makes up our nervous system. Our brain is basically a neural network, so we have this incredible network in our brain. I don't know how they took this picture either, but that's apparently your neural network in your brain. So we have this incredible network in our brain that's made up of these neurons. And one thing I found interesting is I wasn't even really working on this sermon. I was just watching some documentaries on the human brain and then doing a little bit of research too. We have this network of neurons in our brain, but the way that network works is a little bit up to us. So when we decide to do something, when we think, when we use that network, there's electricity that's flowing. You create a whole bunch of different paths, or basically a roadmap in your brain. And the roads that you use the most, if that makes sense, basically those neurons will realign and create stronger roads. So when you do something repetitively, it gets easier and easier to do because the path that electricity takes to your brain is made stronger and stronger. Those neurons realign, they basically create a roadmap in your brain, and you can teach your brain how to function better. I don't know if I explained that very well. Like I said, I'm not a medical person. Hopefully that makes sense. But we have this incredible roadmap in our brain throughout our whole body. The way that we use it determines basically what we strengthen, what becomes weaker. The things we do more often get easier over time because our brains basically are programmed or reprogrammed, which enables them to do that easier the next time. The things which we never do, we're starting at zero because our brain has no memory on how to do that. I have one other picture here. So this is the network in your brain. That's another picture right there. I don't know if anyone's recognized what that is yet. You can kind of see the words. That's Europe. You've probably all heard the expression, all roads lead to Rome. That's, again, I just Googled it. You get all kinds of different pictures, but they all look pretty much the same way. I thought it was fascinating. It kind of looks like a human brain. It's not. But I thought it was fascinating because this road map was all of those roads were made with Rome in mind. And I don't know exactly how accurate that are, but by the number of different websites that had basically the exact same image, I'm going to say there's hopefully some accuracy in that actually being the road map of ancient Europe. And I thought that was very interesting, not only in that it looked like a human brain, but all those roads lead to Rome because all those roads were basically made with Rome in mind. It was the Roman army that went out. Those roads were all made to go back to Rome. It was very intentional. Every single one of those roads led back to Rome. And I think as Christians, we can kind of ask ourselves the same when we look at our mind, which is a million different, basically, roadways or pathways that we can choose to go down. The way that we use our minds, what we choose to think about, our brains actually develop over time, and they morph over time, and neurons realign over time. And the things that we think about, if you're constantly spending your time thinking on one area, that's where you're always going to go back to. It goes, and the longer that goes on, the stronger that becomes. We basically can create this in our minds, I think, in a sense, too. And I thought, just like all roads lead back to Rome, for a Christ-centered mind, ideally our brains would look like this with Christ at the center there. If our mind is truly Christ-centered, if our thoughts, our thought patterns, what we choose to spend our time thinking about is Christ-centered, I think in a sense, again, I'm no medical expert, but our brain would start to look something like that. All roads lead back to Christ. Just find my spot here. So the brain has these 86 billion different neurons that create all these road maps. We determine how these roads get used. There's two parts to our brain. There's the electrical part. There's also a chemical part. There's way more to our brain than I'll ever comprehend, and I think than the human race will ever comprehend too, the way that we can think complex thoughts, and there's way more there than I think the humankind will ever really know. And I, most of all, know really nothing about it. I just found this part somewhat fascinating, the neurological part or the electrical part of your brain. There's also a chemical part of your brain, which has a lot to do with emotions. And I don't know much about that part of our brain either, and I'm not even going to attempt to go there. But the two of them do work together. I do want to just very, very quickly look at muscle memory, because I find that quite fascinating, what muscle memory is. And then I'm just going to touch on addiction too, not very much at all, but addiction is basically those two things working together. When we do something and it feels good, it's a chemical part of our brain that kicks in, and it's a release of dopamine or whatever the other chemicals all are in our brain. But when we learn basically the cause and effect, the reward, we know that acting in a certain way makes us feel this way. We start to rewire our brains. So choosing to do that becomes an instinct. And after a while, our brain becomes wired to act in the way that we know it will get rewarded, or our body will get rewarded. That can be a very negative thing. Obviously, addictions can be very bad. I think we can also, in a way, maybe addiction's not the right word, but we can also train our brains, and I want to talk about that a little bit later, to react in a positive way. I think we can use the way that our brains are made in a very positive way. If we look at muscle memory, do muscles actually remember anything? I'm going to pick on Jenna because she's a nurse. I don't think so. She says no, so we're going to say no. Sorry to put you on the spot. I don't think muscles actually have any memory. So what is muscle memory? If I was going to get someone to throw a ball, but it's just too dangerous, too much was going to go wrong. But if if Nathan had a ball and he threw it at me, the chances are, depending on how hard he throws it, chances are I would catch the ball. I hope I would. What enabled me to do that? If I took that same ball and I threw it at my daughter Raylan, it would hit her square in the face. She probably wouldn't even react. What lets me catch the ball and not Raylan? It's because I've caught the ball 1,000 times before. And when I see that ball coming at me, there's a few things that have to happen. I already said the first thing that has to happen. I see it coming at me. Between my mind and my hand, between my eye and my hand, which is what actually has to catch that ball, there's my mind. And my mind's the one that remembers how to catch the ball. The mind is what has to tell my hand how to catch that ball. My mind has been trained over time to do, basically it's taking in a signal and it's putting out a signal. My mind has been trained over time to tell my hands what to do to catch that ball. My little daughter Raylan, her mind has not yet been trained that way. And I think we can kind of take that analogy. If you never catch a ball in your life, when that ball gets thrown at you, you're not in a great spot. If you, a baseball player, and if you put me next to a baseball player, the ball that he's going to catch is going to hit me in the face because he's trained way more than I have. And he's going to catch something thrown at him at a velocity that I couldn't catch myself. And I think we can kind of use that a little bit as Christians, use that analogy, because life does throw things at us sometimes. And sometimes they come fast. Sometimes we don't have time, the time we would want to think before we react. And I think the way we react is really the way we've trained up to that point in our life to react. And if you look at professional athletes, both athletes and there's some coaches out there, some of them are very specific in the way they train, and they basically train as if it was the game day scenario over and over and over and over again. You might have, there was, and again, I don't even know any of their names anymore, but just listening to some documentaries, and there was a coach that coached the Indianapolis Colts a while ago. I know he was famous for it, and then there's specific athletes too, but he would run a play like it was game day, and there might be no one else on the field, but you would dodge the tackles the way they would come at you, and he would make his players run that same route over and over and over again. And the whole philosophy was when they caught that ball during the game, they didn't stop to think. It was hardwired at that point into their brain what they were going to do. As Christians, I think we can kind of take that analogy and apply it to ourselves too. If we have trained our brain to go to Christ first, to react based on Christ, what we know from his word, whatever we've saturated our brain with, that's what's going to happen when life comes at us quickly, when maybe a curveball comes we weren't expecting. And just looking at my own life too, I've had to challenge myself in a lot of different ways. I think probably not too many people here have heard me swear or get angry, and I'm not a very violent sort of a person, just by personality. But I do know sometimes when things don't go my way, what goes through my head, and sometimes it's not the first reaction that I want to have. And I know even for myself, when I react poorly and then I do it again, habits get formed very quickly. I think the same goes the other way. It takes more work and it takes intentionality. But if we choose to put Christ at the center of our mind in every little circumstance of life, when life comes at us fast, when something happens out of the blue we weren't expecting, I think we can train our minds in a sense to react in a completely different way than they would naturally without God. I want to just take one or two examples from Scripture. I'm not going to look these stories up for sake of time, but I'm going to look really quickly at the life of David, specifically the story of David and then Bathsheba and Uriah. David lived kind of two different extremes in a sense. He was a man that meditated day and night. And if there's an example of your mind being in the right place, I'd say that is it. Meditating day and night. He wrote the Psalms. He walked very closely to the Lord. He also was a man who committed adultery and then followed that up by committing murder. So we see two very different extremes in one life. And we don't really get told exactly where David was at, where he was at mentally, where he put his time and energy as far as his thought life went. But I think we can speculate a little bit. When things went wrong for David, and that's in that story, I don't think he was meditating day and night at that point in his life. I think I can fairly confidently say that he was distracted at that point in his life. If we look at Uriah was very focused. His mindset was on the battle at hand, and that's all he chose to think about. So just looking at the reason that I brought that story into the message tonight is when we look at King David, what was the difference between him meditating day and night and him being in a place where he would commit adultery and then murder to follow that up? And although I'm kind of reading in between the lines here, and I think all of us as Christians know that life is sometimes up and down, but he went from a very difficult point in life where he had to rely on God for absolutely everything to a very comfortable point in his life. And I think it's very easy when we're comfortable to let ourselves become lazy in many ways, but mentally included. And if we look at our lives right now, I would say, generally speaking, we live very comfortable lives. Most of us do. And it's very easy to just kind of take the back seat and let our minds become either dull or maybe let our minds become filled with the wrong things. And it's easier to do that when things are comfortable than when we're running for our life and literally every day and night is relying on the Lord. Another example would be, actually before I go to that other example, if we look at that story, look at both David and we look at Uriah, just speculating on what they were probably filling their minds with, probably made a difference in how they saw the world around them. If we look at King David, he had time at that point. He was in Jerusalem. He wasn't in the fight. I don't know what all went through his mind, but obviously there were probably thoughts that were thought before actions were made. If we look at Uriah, he was focused on the fight. That's where his mind was at, and that's what he stayed true to. And I'm just going to quickly ask for 2 volunteers, just for 30 seconds. It won't take very long. Ken and Alex. I saw your hand, Alex. So if you could come up here just for a second. I like illustrations. It's a really nice way to add time to the clock if you've got to fill 40 minutes. So I just brought 2 panes of glass. I was going to steal them up from upstairs, but they're kind of a pain to take out, and I didn't know if I'd get in trouble afterwards, so I just took some from home. I don't know if you can read that. It's probably has some glare from down there, but I wrote the world on this one, and Ken, you get to be the world. On this other one, this one's going to be very hard to see. I'm going to write Christ. I could have wrote many things on there. Christ. I could have wrote Creator, God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. There's many things I could have wrote on there. If I look at these 2 panes of glass, I'm just going to, again, challenge each one of us, myself included. If we look at our own lives, what do we fill our time with? What do we hold near to us? Where is our energy going? If my energy is primarily in things of the world, if that is what's close to me, and Ken, I'm just going to get you to turn that glass 90 degrees and then hold it out slightly so I'm not looking directly at you, but at Alex. And then I'm going to get Alex to turn his glass the same way. So if the world is what's close to me, if that's what I'm holding, I'm going to see things through that glass, if that makes sense, that shade, that light. And when I look through the eyes of the world, my view of Christ is going to become distorted. I'm going to get you to flip spots. Vice versa, if Christ is what's near to me, if that's where I'm putting all my time, if that's where I'm putting all my energy, when Christ is what I'm holding on to, I'm going to see this world through the eyes of its creator, and the world's going to take on a whole lot less significance than it would have, and my view of Christ is going to be a whole lot better than it would have been. You guys can just set that down. Thank you very much. I hope that kind of makes sense as a visual thing, but I think where we put our time mentally does very much affect our God view. It very much affects our worldview, and it will inadvertently affect our happiness, I think, too, as Christians, and I think it will also affect our testimony. Another example from the Bible, just two quick examples, and great men of God, but for one, Elijah. He obviously, if we know the story of Elijah, went through a very dark time. He wanted God to take his life, and this was after a great victory. Again, I'm not trying to bring Elijah down because he was a great man of God, and we all go through slumps. But if we look at the story, it was right after a great victory. Jezebel said she would kill him. If we look at what he said, his eyes went to the world around him, the lack of support that he had, the threat, and he basically mentally broke down. And I think in some sense, I don't want to put words in his mouth. I don't know what his God view was at that point in time, but I would say God wasn't his primary view right in that moment. The same for Jonah, a very similar story, but he went through exactly the same thing, a very, very low point. Again, when you read that interaction between him and God, his view was all on what was around him. It was the people of Nineveh. It was the shade tree that got eaten by a worm and withered. That was what the focus was. And he ended up in a very low spot. He was probably seeing the Creator through the created world around him more so than the created world through the eyes of the Creator. And I think what we hold near and dear to us, what we put our time and energy to, just like that glass, it's going to not only affect our worldview, it's also going to affect our God view. So we're almost at 8 o'clock. To make this practical, how does this really apply to us? How then do we live? How do we treat our minds as Christians? There's a lot of verses, and I think the topic of the mind you could spend a lot of time on, and there's people that would do it justice much more than I ever could. I do want to look at a short section from Ephesians. I'm going to put it on the screen if you want to turn to it. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 8 to 17. Ephesians chapter 5, starting at verse 8, says, "For you were once darkness, but now are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light, for the fruit of the Spirit is in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, finding out what is acceptable to the Lord, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of those things which are done by them in secret, but all things that are exposed are made manifest by the light, for whatever makes manifest is light. Therefore he says, awake you who sleep, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light. See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is." I put some headings over top of those verses, basically just to break them into two different sections. Those headings were in my Bible. I don't know if they're in yours or not. But I found it interesting the order that those two sections are in. And if we look at those first few verses, it talks about walking in light, basically fellowship with the Lord. If we look at the last few verses, it talks about our walk. Walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. Redeem the time. Do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And I think there is maybe something to the order those verses are written. If we want to make the right decisions, if we want our minds to basically make decisions that honor the Lord, if we want our mind to be in the right spot, it follows our walk with the Lord, our time spent with him, walking in light first. And then basically the renewal of our mind will follow. Obviously, there's a lot of things we can do. Our minds are physical things, and they're also way more complex than we can really know. There are things we can do and habits we can form that I think are very healthy as Christians. I think the biggest thing is, and this is kind of my challenge to myself, this is my challenge to everyone, just introspectively looking at your own life. Where does our mental time and energy go? A lot of things aren't bad. I put the world and I put Christ on that pane of glass. The world is maybe evil, but what I meant by putting it on that glass, it's not necessarily always bad stuff. The news isn't always bad. The news isn't always untrue. But if that's all we ever think about, if that's what takes all our mental time and energy, we're missing out. And we probably do have a warped view of who Christ is. We probably also do have a warped view of what this world is. And whether it's time spent alone with the Lord, whether it's time spent, sometimes it's honestly just singing in a work truck or whatever it is, whatever puts your mind back to the Lord, when we make that our habit, I think it will affect the way that we see this world. It will affect the way that we see Christ. I think it will affect the way that we react when life happens in ways we weren't expecting it to. And one thing I did want to put in here too, there's a lot we can do. I think some things are out of our control. And like I said, I'm no expert, and I don't even want to touch on a lot of things that involve the brain because I don't know, for one, and I'm not qualified to speak it. And I know there's multiple people that I know have gone through very dark periods and choose to always go back to Christ. And I have I have a huge amount of respect for anyone that does that. And I think you will always, if we look at Elijah, if we look at Jonah, you can be a great man, you can be a great woman of God, but choosing to always go back to Christ, to think about him, it will transform our minds, it will transform our lives. I think too, one thing I've been thankful for, and I would encourage anyone, especially younger people, the verses that you know by memory are worth more than you think, because when you're if you're laying awake up at night and you have something going through your mind, you can choose to change that. But if you want to think about Scripture, you have to know Scripture. It also gets a lot harder to memorize Scripture the older you get, so this is just a quick encouragement, I guess, especially for the younger, but for all of us. What we fill our brains with through the day is also what we're going to think about, or at least give ourselves the option to think about when we're staring up at the ceiling at night. Last thing I wanted to say, this is from the story of, this is on the road to Emmaus. This is not the road to Emmaus. This is after he met the disciples after his resurrection. And I found this verse interesting because obviously there's things we can do as Christians, there are good habits we can make, but we also serve a God who created our mind and who can transform our mind and who can change our mind in a way we never could. It says he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures, and these are disciples that had walked every day with him. They had basically heard him. They heard the Scriptures firsthand. They saw the Gospels in action, and yet it took God, it took the Holy Spirit to open their minds to really see things the way they are. We serve that same God. He can do the same for each one of us. And I think he will if we truly seek it and we truly seek him. We are well past the time. I'm going to throw a few verses on the screen. I'm not going to read them. I'm going to ask, I'm maybe going to quickly close in prayer, and then I'm going to ask Tim, I didn't give Emma any warning, but I'm going to ask them to come up, and we'll sing number 542. My apologies for going a little bit over. It's 6 verses. Maybe we'll just sing the first two verses of number 542 after I close in prayer. God and Father, thank you that we can come to you as the creator of all things. Thank you that we can come to you as the creator of each one of us. Thank you that we can trust in your goodness. Thank you that we can come to you, and in faith we can know that you know what is best for us. I pray that you would help us as we walk this life here on earth to seek you first, to make you the center point of our thoughts, of not only our thoughts, our actions, our lives. And Lord, I pray that as we desire you, you would transform us, transform our minds to honor you in not only the way we think, but also then in the way we act. Pray that you would go with each one of us this week. I pray for your presence here, for your presence to go with each of us. Amen.